All right, Jarod, we're live. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'll give the floor to you just so my audience understands who you are. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and what you're building now.
Yeah, of course. My name's Jarod Spiewak. I'm the founder and lead strategist at Comet Fuel. Comet Fuel is a revenue marketing agency that specializes in Google Ads, and we help service-based businesses and SaaS companies that are trying to go from generally about 1 to 2 million a year to about 5 to 10 million a year.
And so thanks for that background. Can we back up even a little more, right? Like you seem, relatively young. You're already running your own company. How did that come to be, right? How did you enter into the entrepreneurial space and say, I'm going to run my own company as opposed to the path that most other people take, go to college, work for somebody else, and just kind of live that normal life?
Yeah, I got started relatively young when I was a freshman in high school. I decided that I wanted to graduate high school early, so I kind of was set up on that path. And eventually, it's like, okay, well, if I'm gonna graduate high school early, that means I'm gonna start college early. And if doing that, then I'm gonna have to pay for college because that's not exactly cheap. So that led me to at the time I couldn't work anywhere else, so I just Googled like a lot of people do. Which is not a good thing to Google, but just how to make money online. Uh, Full of scams, but what I did find was, hey, I could write online for often under a penny a word. And that kind of got me into the world of digital marketing because I was writing all this keyword stuffed SEO content at the time, and that kind of got me from like, I need to go to school for something to maybe I should go to school for marketing. And that led me down the path of kind of choosing my degree in marketing. That kind of led me to working in corporate America for a little bit, and then eventually a marketing agency, and which eventually led me to start my own agency.
And so you mentioned that you decided to graduate high school early, right? I mean, I think that's kind of out of the ordinary, right? So what spurred that decision? Was that something that you kind of just took upon yourself, or your parents guided you to that decision, right? Like it seems out of the norm. I think it certainly can be a good thing, but what spurred that?
I just really didn't like school, so any opportunity to do less of it sounded good to me. The idea really came from my mother told me that her father, or my grandfather, he graduated high school when he was 16, so that kind of gave me the idea. And then one of my best friends at the time, her sister was a senior the same year that we were freshmen, and her sister was graduating a year early. So I was like, oh, this seems possible to do at this school. It seems like it's a thing that other people have done. So from there, I just pursued it, and I just went up to the guidance counselor that was assigned to me, and I said, "Hey, like my goal is to graduate early. How can I do that?" And that set me on the path to basically be able to do that.
And how can someone graduate earlier? Maybe if you could talk about specifically what you did, how you're able to make that happen.
Yeah, so effectively, I was going to two high schools at the same time. So what I was doing was I was going to the actual physical school that I went to, which I took the kind of the standard amount of credits, and then I was getting additional credits by going to an online charter school, which was more self-paced. And so the advantage of the online stuff that I was doing is that I could go into a course. I had more freedom to select things. There's just a greater variety online than what was offered in school, and I could go, oh, here's a intro to web design class. It's supposed to take, I don't remember how long, but I'll just say like 12 weeks to get through or what have you. And I might go through that in 8 weeks or 7 weeks or what have you. And I can sign up for as many as I want. I can go through it as quickly as I want. I would say the conditions for passing those classes were also kind of easy. Most people who went through the system that I went through were usually trying to avoid having to go to summer school or kind of retaking a class. So I think that they were set up to be a little bit easier to complete. And so I was just kind of churning through these additional credits, which were counting as equal credits for the high school, which allowed me to technically, they don't consider it graduating early. I graduated a year and a half earlier, but I still graduated from their perspective on time because I had the same amount of credits as everybody else had to do. I just achieved those credits at a faster pace.
Makes sense. So yeah, obviously you have to take on the extra work. Do you recommend that others follow in your footsteps? I mean, knowing what you know now, where you are, now you're older, you started your own company. I mean, do you ever look back and say, I wish I would have taken my time and kind of enjoyed being younger with fewer responsibilities, or does that not cross your mind at all?
Uh, it's something that I've thought about a couple of times. I don't think I would say I regret anything necessarily. It was honestly kind of a weird time period because the only people that needed to know what I was doing was that guidance counselor that I mentioned and then the principal of the school because they also had to sign off on it. But my teachers didn't need to know, my friends didn't need to know. And to be honest, it sounds silly, but I actually forgot to tell people. And so when I graduated early, for a lot of people, I just stopped showing up. And then when I ran into people, they were just like, oh, like, I just assumed you dropped out, which tracks 100%. Like that's what people would have assumed. I was a CD student, not a very good student. Sat at the back of the class, didn't really talk at all, didn't really pay attention, didn't really complete homework, all that kind of stuff. So people assuming that I dropped out made a ton of sense. And it was kind of having conversations with people that I just like ran into at a store, being like, oh man, like I just kind of really moved past everything and everyone really quickly and just never really looked back. Whether or not that was a good thing, unless I could see what my life would have been like if I didn't do that, it's really hard to say. But I don't think I regret anything.
Okay, so you made a really interesting point that you're not a very good student, but yet, you've been able to, learn a lot about digital marketing, kind of master that skill, start a successful business. So I think there's like this preconceived notion that you need to do well in school to then be successful in the real world. Can you maybe kind of bust that myth or like why that wasn't the case for you? Like why get C's and D's, but then go on to start a successful ad agency?
I think what I found was interesting is that I was interested in the topics being taught in school, but just not the method of that delivery. Because if you look at the content that I watch or listen to when I'm, just I don't know, like doing dishes or just like working on something that I don't have to, give my full attention to, I'm like listening to podcasts or videos going over history or science or things that you'd expect to learn in a classroom setting, but it's just a lot less engaging in that setting. It's just a lot less, I guess you could say, friendly to the way that I like to learn and consume content. So I was definitely interested in the topics. Like I love learning about like math and statistics. I like to get really nerdy about that stuff. But sitting down in a classroom, like I took a course in college about statistics, learned literally nothing. But then on my own, just doing a couple of Google searches, I'm like, wow, I feel like I learned more in like 10, 15 minutes of my own research than I did, sitting through a course for, however many months that is. So like, I don't have a particular reason why other than just like, for me, like the method of delivery, I've just been more successful just trying to sit down and like watch content that's available on YouTube or go through kind of blogs about specific topics or what have you.
Yeah. And I guess just looking back on my experience in high school, I think it's super interesting that you just decided to finish early, right? I remember when I was in high school, I would, I would have fourth period off or I would do, I forget what it was called, but you basically take a period and you go work your job, right? And I look back at school and it's like so much time is, I don't know if wasted is the right word, but you take so much time to your point to take a statistics class that you don't even remember anything about, right? So I don't know if you kind of um, agree with that sentiment that, I mean, school is just so long and there's so much time used learning things that necessarily don't apply to your life today, right? I don't know if that's kind of what your realization was. It's like, okay, let's just get this over with so I could move on and find out what I actually want to do with my life. Was that kind of the thinking, or was it not that intentional?
I don't think it was really that intentional, to be honest. I think it was just I just didn't really want to be there when I was there, and I didn't really know why. Like, I would literally just sit in the back of the classroom. Right across the street from my high school was a library. So pretty much every day after school, I'd go, and I was really into manga at the time. So I'd literally just, they're like comic books, so you can read them pretty quickly. So I'd literally have my backpack full of like 10 different like mangas. And that's what I would sit in the back of the classroom and read, or I'd be like doing a Sudoku or something. And like, nothing that's being said in this classroom is like, none of it for any reason is connecting to me as, hey, this is something that should be worth paying attention to. Never really felt compelled to like participate or raise my hand or what have you. Like homework, I just really wasn't interested in. But the tests I did okay on, not necessarily great at testing, but it was funny to me when it was like, oh, this history test, I did okay, not because I learned anything in class, but because I just played the new Call of Duty and it went through the same exact war. And like some of the campaign missions talked about some of the events that happened, and yeah, it was based on of fact. And like that's what taught me how to pass this history course was that video that I watched on like a channel like Alternative History on, or not Alternative History, but like some of the like History Hub or on YouTube or what have you, or video games that I was playing that was covering science topics, history topics. And it's just like, for me, it's like, well, how valuable is this information I'm learning in this class if I'm doing well enough paying literally zero attention? And for me, if I just need a D to pass and get the credit, there's no incentive for me to do anything better. Like, why get an A if getting a D gets me the same exact result? Like, yes, if you're trying to go to like a, like a, say like a kind of like a good school after that, they do care about grades, but that was never really my intent. I went to college before my parents did, so there wasn't a whole lot of kind of I don't know the right word to use here, but to me, there wasn't a very clear reason to do good in school. It just wasn't a path that I ever expected for myself. Like, like having a more professional job was something that, would be kind of like first in my family. Being college educated would be first in my family. So again, for me, it was just like, oh, I passed. That's all that matters. Who cares if I passed because I got a 66 or because I got 100? Like at the end of the day, we both passed. We're both moving from, 8th to ninth grade, from ninth to 10th, etc.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. So maybe where did you go to college? Was it just a junior college and then into a local 4 year? And considering your experience in high school, do you think that you gleaned more value from, you mentioned you learned marketing from a college setting as well? Because I mean, obviously, I went to college too. I'm not sure. I was a business major. I'm not sure the courses that I took necessarily set you up to actually run a business or how to hold a management position within a company, right? It seemed it's much more theory based, being taught by people that actually haven't done it in the real world. I don't know what your experience was. Was college more of like a light bulb? Okay, wow, this is actually interesting and useful, or not so much?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say it was that useful for me necessarily. I think there are a couple things. So I went to a community college at first. The idea at the time was I'm going to go to a 2-year school, get my associates, transfer those credits into a 4-year school, and then basically get the same degree for like $30,000 less. However, after I finished college, so I graduated. I got my 2-year degree like a month after I turned 18. At the time, I had like a corporate marketing job, and I had determined at the time that where I was, that position that I had, there wasn't a future for me at that company. So I was already interviewing at other places. And I got a job offer from a marketing agency that was offering me twice what I made at the corporate job and work from home. And there was no kind of education expectation. And because I got set on that path, there was just never a reason for me to go back to school. But if I hadn't done that, then I would have ended up kind of finishing those 4 years. What I did learn is in the digital marketing space, there are a lot of people that didn't go to school for marketing, didn't go to college at all. I work with some people that, didn't even finish high school, and you get a very large range of, people who have either, PhDs to people who have never kind of finished school. And because of that, there's no real education requirement in the space, which I think is really cool. It keeps the barrier to entry low. But what I have found school to have been an advantage of there are some fundamentals that people that didn't take marketing classes have to learn over time, which I knew at the get-go, like terms like customer journey. Like that's a very kind of generic concept, but not something that people who at the time that I was getting into SEO were necessarily learning. They were learning, oh, I create content, I put keywords into it, I stuff it all the time, but they weren't really learning about like intent and why do people buy, which was more of like what we were learning in school. And those were things that I saw the industry sort of kind of have big pushes for at some points. Like, oh, it's not about like keywords that have search volume, it's about intent and why people are searching for this and the psychology behind it. And for me, it's like, yeah, that was like marketing 101. And so I think that there was just a disconnect between the industry having a lot of people that didn't go to school for marketing, not learning those more general concepts, and then kind of discovering them over time, and there being this big push in the industry for like reframing existing kind of tactics with more marketing fundamentals, which I already had a grasp on. That's the only real advantage I would say. Um, when I went, I did have some professors that did have businesses. Some had active businesses, some had sold their businesses. So I wouldn't say that everybody that I learned from were just people that just learned from books, which was nice. But that being said, one of the professors also ran the entire marketing department. So we got some insight as to how the back end of this works. And he's like, if I want to make any change to the curriculum, like I have to petition somebody, they have to petition somebody else. It has to go to the board. Like they have to approve that. Then like it has to go through like 8 different chains of commands. And so he's like, if I want to make any change to this curriculum, it's at least a year. And so with how quickly things change, like email marketing was like a paragraph in one of my textbooks. And this is at a time where we're way beyond email marketing. Like social media, like everyone was already on it. Like social media wasn't really in textbooks even that much. Like if it was just like a sentence or two. It was really like we were talking about direct mail, we were talking about TV. And so if you want to talk about concepts like Facebook ads, it's actually detrimental to have that to a certain extent in a course. If you're like, okay, great, what's working today, how it works today, we're going to get that into a textbook a year from now. And by the way, like none of this is accurate anymore. These targeting settings might not even exist. This ad channel, this marketing channel may not even exist. Think about things like Clubhouse, which was really popular for 3 months and then gone. You can't really you have to stick with things that have been there for a while, concepts that are always going to be there, because it's just too difficult to change things.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, and I don't know if you have any ideas. I don't know how a university even keeps up with that, right? Because today the pace of change, I'm sure trying to keep up with all the changes with even what Google's doing, like from an artificial intelligence front, or how they're changing their ads manager or things along those lines. So with that being said, I don't know. Do you recommend that others go to college? I mean, or is there another path that says just get in there, work, get a job at a company, and get experience firsthand?
I think people need to be given a greater overview of what their options are. For me, at least when I was in school, and at this point, that was like nearly 10 years ago. At this point, maybe even 10 years ago, I the kind of the way that you kind of go through school is, okay, great, you're gonna junior year you're gonna start thinking about college, and then senior year you're gonna start go toward college, you're gonna choose your major, you're gonna go into that thing. But for a lot of people, they're going into whatever they think they're going to be interested in, and not something that they necessarily have hands-on experience with. And that's going to be different for different people. If you're going into culinary school, you might be someone who like sits down all the time and does spend a lot of time cooking at home and is really interested in food and stuff like that. You have hands-on experience. But if you're someone who's like, you know what, I want to get into marine biology, you may have never had the opportunity to do so. That might just be something that you're like, oh, like based off of, people that I think are cool, like celebrities I think are cool, or like, other people that I think are interesting. I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson say something, so I want to get into physics. I want to get into astronomy or what have you. But you don't have that hands-on experience. So I think for some people, it makes sense to go right into college. I think for some people, it makes sense to take a year or two, gain experience within what you think you want to go into, because what most people don't want to do is start a 4-year degree and then 2 years into it say, hey, this actually isn't for me. Let me switch to something else, finish that 4-year degree, then get into the job force and say, hey, I actually hate doing this. This makes me really unhappy. And what I want to then pursue requires a completely different degree. I think that that's kind of a death spiral that a lot of people get into, where they're like, I don't like what I'm doing now. I'm not interested in it, but I also don't have the time or the money to pursue something else. So I think that for a lot of people, it probably makes a lot more sense to take a year or two after school, try and pursue what you're interested in, and then have the ability to go, okay, great, I want to go to school for and I want to go to culinary school because I've worked in a kitchen for the past year and a half, and I really like that environment, and that's really for me, and like that's what I want to pursue. I want to go into robotics because I have been messing around with this on my own. I bought my own Arduinos and I've been making stuff at home or what have you, rather than just say, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Now let's go spend $100,000 to get a degree over the next 4 years and hope for the best.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point now, especially in today's world. There's so much access to information, in like marine biology, for example. You use that as an example. If you truly wanted to do that, you have access to people or content on YouTube about what it's like to actually be a marine biologist. Or if you go to school to be a marine biologist, what does that mean? What opportunities present itself? And you may say, "Oh, I don't know if it makes sense to go spend 100 grand on a degree when I'm only going to be making 60 grand, like what kind of life does that set up for myself, right? Like, so I think people now have the resources to do the due diligence and research prior to jumping into something. But I think you make a really good point. um, Kind of in that same vein, you mentioned when you were young, you googled how to make money online. So I'm curious kind of what results came up, right? Because I know that that can kind of lead you down paths where you're giving people money that don't necessarily provide you with the tools you need to actually start a successful business. So how did you not fall victim to that? Or maybe you did initially. How did you basically kind of guide yourself to creating actual viable skills that actually allow you to now run a business, as opposed to kind of falling victim to that, I don't know, course guru culture that some can fall victim to?
Yeah, so I think there were two things. One is I didn't have money to pay for those courses if I wanted to, so that certainly helped me. I had no ability to go down some of those routes. For the more for other types of scams, growing up on the internet, I was just already educated on, like, if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's a duck. So, people saying, oh, like, just take these surveys online and you're going to make, 3 grand a month. Like, no. Or just like, oh, like, we're going to send you something in the mail. Like, you're going to pay us like a couple $100 to like work for us. And then you're going to make all this money. Like that just doesn't track. So I think a lot of that stuff just very quickly was like, oh, that's obviously BS to me. And then the kind of other people that I really didn't have an understanding of if they were legit or not. So some things that I ran into at the time was like, oh, like penny stock trading or affiliate marketing, or those were probably like the biggest ones at the time. And yeah, I looked into those a little bit, but I was like, even if I wanted to do this, I don't have $300. Like, I don't even have a bank account at this time. So I'm like, there's no way for me to pursue that. I think for most people, you're not going to find much viable doing that. But what I did kind of run into was just like blog posts of people just like, oh, like, here are some things that you can do to make a little bit of money online. And one of them that I found was just writing online. And I looked into the site, and as far as I could tell, it was legit. And it wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't necessarily good money at all. Like I mentioned, I was writing for under a penny a word, but I was like, okay, great. Like it makes sense to me. Like, businesses are going on there saying, I need content to put on my website. I'm willing to pay you for that. I write that content. That seems very low risk. And while I didn't make much money doing that, it was what kind of propelled me to going, oh, there's this thing that people keep mentioning called SEO. What is that? Let me Google that and look into that. And that kind of led me to learning more about it. And that's what pursued, kind of interested me at first, saying, okay, great, let's go into marketing. And then just naturally, just over time, learning more concepts, being able to do more accurate research. When I worked that corporate job, the head of IT at that company, he had access to a company called Linda, and Linda has like a bunch. It's kind of like Udemy, has a bunch of like online courses, and so he gave me access to that, and I was able to kind of pursue more of my own education without having to pay for any of these potentially like dangerous courses, etc. And don't get me wrong, over time, I definitely put money into a ton of different courses, some a lot better than others, but I think what did kind of save me from potentially wasting a lot of money and immediately going, oh, this is all BS, was just being too young to have the resources to actually try and pursue paying somebody $1,000 to teach me like how I can make $1 million a year trading penny stocks. Because like that's something that at that time that I very well may have fell for, that I wouldn't have had the tools to go, oh yes, it's easy to fake testimonials, it's easy to Photoshop screenshots and all this kind of stuff. So I do think that there was some element of luck within what I did, for sure.
So, would you say that you developed more of the skills that you have today from like firsthand job experience working for the corporate job that you had or working for the marketing agency you had, or was it more ancillary stuff that you did on your own? You mentioned the Linda courses or other courses that you purchased maybe more recently. What has like allowed you to upskill the most to get you to where you are today?
Yeah, I would say everything had value, but what had the most value was definitely the stuff that I've done on my own, simply because I had full freedom. So when I worked for uh, that marketing agency, they specialized in law firm marketing. So at the time, I was only working with law firms, which is a fairly restrictive industry. And the way that they worked is all clients were on WordPress, all clients were law firms, and it was a lot of the same, right? And that's kind of it's kind of how the model works. If you're trying to work within just one industry, you want your systems and processes to kind of work across the board, so you can copy and paste as much as possible, keep margins high, etc. But what I was doing at the same time was learning all these other tactics and techniques that really just didn't work for that niche, where it's like, oh, their scope of work is too small. Like, this really works for national based businesses, or this works for businesses that have a lot of like really great kind of like custom content, and not just like more, I would say more standard like SEO blog posts, etc. So that kind of additional education that I had on my own, I was then able to kind of pursue and say, oh, I learned all this stuff. Now I want to go and try and implement it. But what I'm doing right now, it just wouldn't make sense. Let me try and pursue some of that on my own, and just having full freedom to test things and mess around with things on my own without having to follow somebody else's SOPs or anything like that, was definitely more helpful. But that being said, everything that I learned from like corporate, I wouldn't say I necessarily gained too many marketing skills there, but it did help me understand more of professional communication. And I think that was something that helped me stand out a lot being as young as I was, is that I was able to talk to people that were professionals in a more professional manner that they weren't expecting from someone as young as I would. That definitely helped me in that regard. Working for that agency helped me understand like what agencies look like, what it's like to kind of work in a more, I guess you could say, startup based environment. That when I started working for the company, they're doing at least 1.5 million a year, if not a little bit more. So it's still a small company, but kind of off the ground. Like, what does that look like? And having, what does it look like to work as a part of a team, to eventually like be a leader on that team, and without having to kind of go out and start on my own thing and figure everything out for myself. So there are definitely learnings from every situation, every experience, but the stuff that I did on my own, I would say, is the most valuable.
And so, when did you go out on your own, and how did you develop the confidence that you could do it and you could start a viable business and acquire customers and serve them and get them results?
It was kind of a slow start. So in 2015, I started to. That's when I realized that corporate job just wasn't going to be for me long term. I realized that there wasn't a future for me at that company, and so I started to interview, and those interviews really weren't going anywhere. I really just wasn't making any progress. So what I wanted to do was basically improve my skill set. So I went up and I signed up for a site called Upwork.com, which most people at this point have know of. At that time, they'd just gone through their merger with eDesk and Olance, or Odesk and Elance. And so I started working for $5 an hour. I was like, hey, like, this isn't to make money. This is to like gain skills and build a portfolio. And the goal at the time was to use that portfolio to then go and get another job. And that led me to getting that offer to work for that marketing agency. I was there for just under 2 years. The first year, all I did was work with them. That second year, when I started to try and learn more on my own, I was like, man, like, here are all these ideas that I want to try, but I can't try it for these clients, or it's not my department, or what have you. So I started to go back to freelancing and trying to have one or two side clients on my own where I had more freedom. And what that led me to was kind of specializing and working for other agencies at that time, because I knew how to talk very technical. So I could get on a call with someone who started their agency that's like, I have 3 to 5 clients, and I want to do SEO for them, but I don't have that skill set. And then I would basically come in and lead the, quote unquote SEO department, or kind of handle all of the SEO for all their clients. And so I would have like 2 or 3 clients of my own, but being able to work on, 15, 20, 25 different projects, where I had, for most of them, full creative freedom, full technical freedom to kind of do whatever I wanted. And over time, I stopped working for a lot of other agencies and just started working with businesses directly. And as that increased, then at the end of 2017, around November of 2017, I was making about 4 times my salary on my freelancing stuff than I was at the agency. And I'd gone from, at that point, full time down to part time. I was only working about 10 hours a week at that agency. And I sat down with my manager at the time, and she was just like, why are you still here? Basically. And because I was afraid, I was like, man, if I go out on my own, like it's just on me. Like if something goes wrong, like it's up to me to make all these decisions. Like everything's on me. That's really scary to do. And I wasn't really convinced that having my own business was right for me. And so I was really, really hesitant for a long time. Like I was probably financially ready to make the jump 6 months prior. But it was that conversation where she just told me like, you shouldn't be here anymore, basically. I was like, okay, great. I was in Thailand for an event at the time. So as soon as I kind of flew back home, I put in my notice and I was like, I'm going to be gone here in like 2 weeks. And so early 2018, I spent kind of like a month or two figuring out exactly what I wanted to do. And then in 2018 is when I formalized going from just operating under my name to what was called Blue Dog Media at the time, which specialized in SEO. And then Comet Fuel was the rebrand that we did in 2020 behind the scenes. Then we launched publicly 2021.
And how has that gone, right? You had so much hesitation, and when you finally did it, has it been easier than you expected? Has it been harder? I mean, what things have come up that you didn't expect? Like, just kind of your overall take.
So my fear was that things would crash and burn. So I really, the numbers were basically when I left working for that agency, I was doing about $20,000 a month on my own. That was December 2017. February 2018, I did $3,000. So everything crashed and burned. So what happened was I had a bunch of clients, no processes, no systems. Like there were clients that I took on that I forgot were clients. There were reports that I forgot to give out. I was kind of managing a bunch of contractors to try and help me with fulfillment. And I forgot like, oh, what contractor was assigned to what client? Like everything was just crazy and a mess. And so I had a lot of clients who around the same time just fired me. And with how much I was working, how crazy things were, there were also a lot of clients that were like, I just don't think you're worth working with respectfully, or in some instances maybe not so respectfully, that just like weren't good fits. But I was just like, yes, if you're willing to give me money, I'm willing to do some work for you. And I just kind of looked at everything and went, this sucks. Like it's already kind of a sinking ship. Like I'm going to cut out what's already bad as well. But what I didn't expect is just how much worse it would get. And so I was put in a position where I had signed a 3-year lease for an office, and I had now had very little money coming in. And so that kind of put me in a position where I kind of had really no choice but to effectively pretty much live in that office space and work, like on a good day, only 12 hours a day, on a bad day, like 16 hours a day, like sometimes literally like meeting, sleep for an hour and a half, wake up, do another meeting, sleep for an hour. And just like that was a day for like 2-3 days sometimes. Sorry, I forgot your original question, but yeah, so like it definitely did not go as well at the start than I expected.
Well, can you maybe then talk about the recovery, right? Because you're obviously still doing it today, so it's not like okay, you went to 3,000 in revenue and then you went you went to zero and then you went negative and you couldn't pay the lease and you had to go back and get a job or move in with your parents or whatever it is. So I'm just curious, kind of, right? Because I think a lot of people, maybe people that are listening to this, oh yeah, I want to start my own ad agency or whatever it is. Like that's a good example of like the reality of it. But you were able to pull through. So maybe you can talk about how you pulled through.
Yeah. So I think there's been a couple times in the business where things have hit a peak and then kind of hit it like a new peak and then hit a new low. And every time we've gotten to, I wouldn't say a new low because that low is higher than the last low, but what it does is it gives you a chance to kind of reflect on everything. If every single day you're in calls nonstop, you're taking on new business, you don't really have too much time to objectively look at your business. But when you're sitting there and you're like, all the work that I have to do today will take me like 2 hours. And you're like, I have a lot of time now to think and like reflect on what's happening. And for me, what was clear kind of that first real big drop was everything's a mess because I was just saying yes to anybody who was willing to give me money. And I did that too fast. And I got really excited with how good I had gotten at getting on a phone call with somebody, closing them on that first phone call within like 10, 15 minutes. That was working really well for me at the time. And I was just doing that as much as possible. And kind of where it gets like the phoenix from the fire was going, okay, well, let's think about how this could be an actual business and not just like me saying yes to people willing to give me money. And that was coming out with saying, I think it wasn't too inventive, but it was just calling it the SEO blueprint at the time. This was early 2018. And so what I did is I said, okay, well, let's take the first month of an engagement that most people have with an agency. Let's turn that into a separate engagement. And that's going to be its own price point. That's going to create its own proposal. And it was just basically taking a different approach to the more traditional SEO agency framework at that time. And from there, it's just like, okay, great. I know it didn't work last time, which was letting things get really out of control. So this time I'm going to do a better job of writing things down. I'm going to do a better job of not necessarily having set SOPs, but at least knowing like I need to have some system that reminds me. I need to have a spreadsheet of all the clients that I have. Like I can't just rely on memory. That's really stupid. I need to have some sort of task or reminder to make sure that I'm sending out invoices. I need to have some sort of task or reminder to make sure I'm getting paid for those invoices, that people are getting the reports that they need. And so really what kind of allowed me to kind of rise from those ashes, if you will, was just recognizing the things that went wrong and just creating solutions to those problems and then just kind of doing it all over again. And it took me, if you want to consider like the first time I did anything online from like 2015 to, the end of 2017 to go from effectively, 0 to 20 grand a month, it only took me like 8 months to go from basically 3 back to like 25 or so. And there was like kind of like, sure, you could say like some inventive stuff happening on the SEO side, but even if I just did what every other agency was doing at the time, or, quote unquote agency, just being me at the time, it was really just recognizing, hey, this crashed and burned because I was just saying yes to anybody willing to give me money. That's not okay. I was saying yes to people, even if they were really small. I need to be more firm in having, some amount of pricing standards. I need to take it more seriously, that, I need to keep better track of things. And I was still working a lot, but it was a lot more efficient at that time.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were able to implement systems, right, that allowed you to actually track what you were doing, right? And to you now, it's probably seems obvious to you, but when you started, it wasn't, right? So it's like failing and then building back up. So I think that's a really good story. One thing that you mentioned that I kind of want to unpack, because I think when somebody wants to start a business, right, I think this is the hardest part, is the sales part, right? Or the leads part of, you basically said, hey, I got really good at getting somebody on a call and selling them on that call. So I don't know if maybe you could speak to how you did that, right? I know that these days it seems that like everybody's doing cold outreach. Like even I, with barely any followers online, get bombarded with stuff every day. So I don't know how you did that, or maybe you can articulate the framework that you used to simply close people. Was it that you kind of had testimonials and had support to back you up, or was it a really good offer that you'd put together? Was it the fact that you were kind of a technical expert and you could get them on a call and really get into the finer details of what you're going to do to them? Just kind of curious, maybe if you can unpack that a bit.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things there, and I wouldn't necessarily say what I did is what I would necessarily do if I restarted, because there's a lot that I've learned since then. But what was working for me from a closing perspective was my technical knowledge. Like I didn't really know sales. I'd like to this day, like I wouldn't necessarily say I'm great at sales, but what I could do at the time is get on a call with people and they would say, we experienced a drop on this date. And because all I was doing in my free time was just learning, I'd say, around this date, there was this algorithm update. This is what it was called. This is what the industry currently believes the implications were. This is what is currently considered kind of the path or the solution to this problem. And just literally off the top of my head, being able to give like very specific details of like, this changed on this date. This is a core algorithm update. So this is what you can kind of expect over the next couple of months, or there's just this major penguin algorithm update, and that's going to affect more on the backlink profile. And so looking at your backlinks, this is what I recommend you change, so on and so forth. And at the time, a lot of people weren't getting that great of technical information. A lot of people were taking those kind of those online courses and then just learning the basics and then learning some sort of like basic sales framework of like building rapport and like finding pain points and like you kind of I don't want to say like manipulating people, but being like Connor, you just told me that this is a $200,000 problem that you're facing. Why wouldn't you pay me $1,000 a month to solve it for you, or something like that? Like I just like that just makes me uncomfortable to say. But what I could say is like I can't tell you that it's going to work, but I can tell you like these are the exact things that I'm going to do. And people just weren't hearing that at the time, and that worked for me to at least to some people. For other people, they're like, this confuses me, you're scaring me, go away, basically. But speaking about cold outreach, I've done a lot of cold outreach from, my own efforts or hiring other people to do it. And honestly, I think that's one of the worst ways to get started, because like we've done good cold outreach, successful cold outreach, and it has only come by having a brand and an offer that's worth paying attention to, I would say. And so, because you're approaching someone that's never heard of you through a medium that a bunch of other people are also contacting them. And so at a lot of my cold email efforts that were failing, I was always like, oh man, it's because I don't have enough people opening the email, or because I don't have a good enough sales process, once they get on the call or what have you. And it was just like, why would anybody work with us? Where it's a very high risk thing for them to do if we're emailing them and it's like, hey, we have no online presence, nobody's ever heard of us before, we do roughly the same thing that everyone else does, but like, please pay us instead of these other 8 people who gave you the same exact pitch. It's not going to come down to your email template. What did work for us when we did have success on outbound was saying like, yes, maybe it is higher risk to work with us because you haven't heard of us before, but here are a ton of testimonials specifically for people who have been in your exact problem, specifically for people who are in your exact industry. That worked well. When we kind of redid our brand image, which we did start of 2023, I believe, that kind of revamp, and that's what's live today, like our website and our like brand image and all that kind of good stuff. That also, we saw an uptick in people reaching out because, or people responding to our outbound at the time, because we just looked a lot more real. It seemed like it didn't look like a website or a brand that somebody just threw up in the past 20 minutes. And if you have, like, I'm not saying like, hey, go spend, tens of thousands of dollars, on brand design and brand imagery and, making a nice website or what have you. But for us, we were at a point where that was an extra cherry on top. People looking at it saying, hey, this looks like a real company that's done things before. So it's less of a threat and less of a risk to accept, some sort of offer given through a cold message. So I think the outbound is much easier once you have some amount of brand recognition, when you have case studies, and when you can be very tactical in like what you're providing to somebody to lower their risk. What I would recommend doing is pursue marketing channels and sales channels that you yourself buy from, because if you don't understand that channel, you don't understand why people buy from that channel. So for me, I buy things through cold email all the time. I have no problem with people cold pitching me. Like, if people give me a good pitch, there's a good chance that I'm going to at least try you out, or at least hear you out on a call. I have no problem buying through cold email. So I have no problem looking at cold email and determining and understanding what's going right and what's going wrong, because I can reflect that from my own buying behavior. So what I recommend to people, like, I wouldn't like try and pursue social media content if you're not someone that spends time on social media, because you don't get it. You don't understand why people use these platforms. You don't understand how people interact with these platforms. You don't understand what they value, what they don't value. And so if you're just like, oh, like the hot thing right now is everyone's building communities on social media, but if you're not someone who likes to hang out on communities on social media, there's just going to be a massive disconnect, and it's probably not going to go well. So, and that goes for everything. Like, don't go to meetup groups if you're not the type of person who like is happy to like go up and like go to groups. And it doesn't have to be like a networking group, but if you're like, oh man, there's like a woodworking class happening like down the street, like maybe, we'll get a couple friends together and like we'll go do that. Like, great. Like, maybe then going to meetup groups where you are going to a place that you're not familiar with, meeting and hanging out with people and talking to people that you've never met before. Maybe that works for you because you understand how that environment works. But I wouldn't just go, oh, cold email because that's what's really popular. You need to understand the medium. Otherwise, you have no ability to really diagnose effectively what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. It's just a complete guess. And at that point, you're just going to be copy and pasting someone else's system that chances are 1,000 other people are using. Like, I can't tell you how many times I go into my inbox and like 4 different people are contacting me, and they're all using the same general method. Like, it's all the same framework. The exact words that they're using in their email might be different. They might be selling me different things, but I'm like, I know that you all took the same course, or that you're all copying other people that took the same course. And so I now become, my eyes basically glaze over. It's a pattern recognition. I can just archive that immediately. Because I've seen it 1,000 times. It doesn't matter that your offer is different. Like, it just immediately strikes me as not something that's new.
I think it's a good point. So would you maybe more so recommend that for starting out, right? I think, to just push back a little bit, if you want to scale your agency, for example, you're going to have to get good at cold outreach no matter what. You're going to have to get good at organic content no matter what. You're going to have to get good at paid ads no matter what. So isn't there another side of the coin? Like, yes, if you just go into cold outreach and think it's going to be easy, it's not. But by maybe using those generic templates at the beginning, you realize, okay, crap, I need to figure this out. And like you did with SEO, spend more time learning about it. I'm just kind of trying to think about like, these are the major channels to grow a business, whatever, pick your channel. And if you want to grow something to a reasonable amount of revenue or reasonable size, you're going to need to master some of these, right? Regardless of if you have experience with them or not.
Yeah, so I think it depends on like what size. Like if someone's coming up to me and they're saying like I need to master cold email, I need to master organic content, I need to master you know, all these other major marketing channels as well. I'd say, okay, great, you're trying to build $100 million business. And if you're trying to do that, that's great. But like you can build a, multi-million dollar business having a single channel. Like that could literally be you hanging out in like a single Facebook group, like depending on the size of the group, and just being really communicative and known in that group. You can just become the person. Like there are subreddits that are based off of specific skill sets, based off of if you go to any like the PPC subreddits, there are like 2 or 3 people that you'll see respond to every single post. And if you're someone who hangs out in them, that those are the go-to people to ask questions to. Those are the go-to people that everyone just assumes that whatever they say is the correct answer because they're considered the influencers of that space. And if you become that, like it does, like you might never have to send a cold email, and you could still have a $10 million plus agency. You could still probably have $100 million plus agency. You don't never have to run ads. You never have to send cold emails. You never have to create content. There are a million ways to do it. It just matters like path of least resistance. I'd say for a lot of people, that's not going to be cold email. Like, hey, yes, can you do it? Can you be successful? Yes. Do I know people that have like built $1 million companies just sitting there cold calling all day and they just figured it out? Yes. And you can definitely pursue that. I think that for a lot of people, they'll find higher success rates and a path of least resistance if they find something that they're more familiar with at the get-go, that is something that they're happy to do. Like if you're someone that like really hates going to, like if you're someone that hates creating content, like I have a buddy, he has $1 million agency. He never creates content. Like he hates it. Like he doesn't enjoy being on camera. It's just not really his thing. But what is his thing is networking. Like he's great at building relationships. And so he'll gain tons of business by just simply going to an event and just talking with people and just naturally never trying to sell anyone anything, just having a genuine conversation. And because he's just good at that, people naturally go, oh, wait, here's this problem that I'm facing. How would you solve that? And then that turns into them having a conversation and then them signing multiple thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars a month contracts because that's what they're good at. But for him, going down the path of content creation would be such a massive learning curve and something that would be hard to stay motivated of. I wouldn't say it makes sense. But at a certain point, yes. Will they find that I can only go to so many networking events, or I can only train so many people in my business to be able to go to networking events, and we stalled out at 8 million a year, and now we need to get to 15 million, and we're going to need to find some other channel to pursue, and maybe that's content creation. Sure. It just kind of depends. Kind of rambling at this point, but to your effect on cold email, like if we were to make another go at cold email, I would be hiring 4 or 5 people, building a team for it, rather than us sitting down trying to figure it out all on our own, because we just have the scale at which to do that and to really sit down and figure it out. And I would be throwing offers at people that I would know that most people that are starting agencies just never would be able to compete with. And that would be my goal, is to be like, hey, like everybody else is like, I'm not saying that I would do this, but sending out an email to someone being like, hey, I will pay you $500 just to watch this video that I sent you. Why? Because I'm going to run the math. I'm going to say that might be $50, that might be $100, what have you. But I'm like, oh, here's something that might get people's attention that I don't think other people are going to compete with, that somebody who definitely is just starting off their agency that is trying to learn cold email is really going to struggle with. Yes, like I said, like you could go down that path, but if there's a path of least resistance, definitely take that opportunity rather than trying to like crawl or claw your way forward for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of good points. So maybe a good way to summarize it, like if you're starting out and you already know you enjoy doing something or you're good at something, explore that channel. But another way to look at it too is yeah, maybe you need to try cold calling, cold outreach, organic content, like try it all. And then whatever feels like, hey, I can continue doing this and it will get me results. Like focus on that one channel, right? I mean, you make a really good point. Like if you are starting a brand new agency, you're not going to be cold DMing, cold calling, creating organic content, going to networking events. Like you just don't have time to do all of that, right? It's more important to focus on the channel that you're best at, that you can continue on and get good at and scale to millions or multiple millions of dollars through that one channel, like you said, which is entirely possible.
Yeah, and I think people think that, for them to have like a seven or multiple seven-figure or even eight-figure business, they need to have like these really complex funnels. They need to have like a dozen different marketing channels. They need to be doing outbound. They need to be creating organic content. They need to be doing SEO. They need to be doing social media. They need to be doing all these different things. And I would argue that the vast majority of channels, unless you're doing something that's like, like I mentioned, like Clubhouse or that only exists for like 3 months, a lot of these channels are something where a single channel oftentimes can bring you to that multiple seven-figure mark if you just really master that one channel. But what I do see a lot of people do is they're like, oh yes, I do a little bit of cold emailing and we get some clients off of that, and then we also are running some ads and we're also creating some content. And like, man, if you just took all that budget, all that time and effort, you just really mastered cold email or outbound or whatever that channel is, and just understand like, oh, how can we do better segmenting? How can we create different offers for different types of segments of people? How can we create different price points that people can enter into our overall funnel? Yes, what we want to sell is a $5,000 recurring a month service, but maybe there's some sort of $99 one-time offer that will allow us to sell to all these people that would traditionally reject our emails, but now we're operating at a scale which we can have that separate $99 offer, build a relationship with somebody, and then over the next 2 years get them to be ready to the point where they're able to give us that $5,000 a month or what have you, and really just find ways to maximize what we're able to do in that channel. I think a lot of people just don't realize just how far you can push a single channel if you really just take the time to try and master it as to as high a degree as you can.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice. And so as we kind of close out here, I want to talk more about you and your business, right? Like kind of maybe you can, so you've talked about it a bit, but maybe you can articulate it like what your pitch is to clients or what separates you from all the other SEO agencies. Like what have you figured out about SEO and Google Ads that others haven't, that allow you to get outsized results for your clients?
Yeah, so our conversations with people kind of go like this nowadays, which is, how much money did you spend last month on your ads? Everybody can answer that question, no problem. Then when I ask, how much money did you make on your ads? All of a sudden that question becomes a lot harder to answer. Because we work with lead generation companies, most of them only know how many phone calls, how many form fills that they got on any sort of basis. Some are able to say, here's how many came in from Google Ads specifically, but most can't. Some are able to say, here's what keyword ad group campaign drove these calls, but most can't. And so a lot of businesses very quickly find themselves in this position where you're paying these marketing companies to make you more money. They don't know if they're making you more money. You don't know if they're making you more money. So where we come in, we kind of close that gap between that marketing and sales data by not trying to drive you more phone calls, form fills. I could care less how many phone calls you're getting. Like ideally you're getting as few as possible because you're busy. Like you want, if you could get as few as possible that they are all, willing to pay you $1 billion, like you'd be much more thrilled with that. But regardless, you don't care about phone calls and form fills. You care about revenue and profit, but you have no way to measure that right now. So you're kind of operating in the blind here. You could have one keyword that generates 100 leads and 10 sales. You could have another keyword, the same amount of ad spend, generates 50 leads and 20 sales. But if you're only paying attention to leads, you're going to be spending more and more money on that former. And over time, you're going to be wondering, wow, I'm scaling my ad spend so high. I'm seeing my conversions increase, but my profit just isn't increasing. It might even be going down over time because I'm turning off all that stuff that was actually driving sales, but I had no way of measuring it. And so you end up in so many scenarios where just like, this isn't working, and I have no ability to determine how or why, what's going wrong. And that was the big promise of digital marketing. The entire point was, hey, everything's trackable. You can measure it. Yet these lead generation businesses often cannot track or measure the actual success. And so how do you, your goal, how would you measure? My fourth or fifth question, depending on how the conversation goes, is, okay, well, how will you determine this relationship is successful? Everybody always says something like ROI, or you're making me more money than I'm spending, or something to that effect. Like, okay, well, we just established that you have no, like, you're not tracking that. You have no ability to determine that. And sometimes that's just that, like, like I never thought about that. Like, yes, I want more money, but like, how do I know? I'm using these proxies of more phone calls and form fills. But if 1,000 people called me today and said, I want to buy ice cream, and this is a law firm, like, our marketing people are going to spend more money on that because it's driving more phone calls. And we just have no idea, no way to pursue that. And I also have a bunch of stories from people just like, hey, here's this company that we were working with that was spending like $500,000 plus a month on their advertising. We cut their cost per lead in half, and that led to exactly $0 in additional revenue because we could track it. Like, everybody was super excited. Like, hey, we just doubled your lead acquisition. We just cut your cost per lead in half. Everybody would assume like, oh, we're going to double the profit or double the revenue from this marketing campaign now. No, we had access to the CRM. We were able to connect everything, follow everything, and go, oh, there's no measurable impact to revenue. In fact, it may have even been down slightly. So while everybody's celebrating, what a lot of agencies will do as well, they're like, wow, I think I'm doing this great job for this client. Like, holy crap, this is amazing. And then the client's sitting there like, I like, what value am I getting from working with this company? Like, I see no difference on my P&L. But this agency's telling me that they're doing such great work. And so there's just a massive disconnect between what agencies determine successes, what businesses determine successes, and how each measure that it just basically guarantees a lot of engagements are going to fail before they even start.
No, I mean, I think you've figured it out, right? Like, through, and I've learned that through this whole conversation from, I maybe starting, graduating high school early, the different jobs that you've taken it upon yourself to learn. So with that being said, what are your goals for Comet Fuel? Maybe if you're willing to share, you can kind of talk about where you stand today in terms of revenue and where you'd like to be in the future. I don't know, maybe 5 years down the road. And I'm just curious, are you at a place where you say, I don't want to grow anymore? I'm making good money. I'm working a decent amount, but I have good work-life balance. Or are you saying, hey, I feel like I have, like you've mentioned, a unique value proposition. I want to hire a bunch of people. I want to make as much money as possible. I don't know what your perspective is.
Yeah. So this has been kind of a back and forth for a long time for a number of different reasons. Because there have been times where we've pursued top level growth aggressively. There have been times where we go, forget about top line, the bottom line is actually what matters. And so let's make it this super profitable, so on and so forth. The end goal that we're trying to get to as a revenue number, I honestly can't tell you exactly what that's going to look like. That could be, a $10 million business. We could get to 10 million and say, hey, let's go for 100 million. But for me, what's more interesting is, as kind of cliche as it is to like sleep well at night and be happy. As silly as that sounds, we're at a point where I make enough money and have enough freedom in my daily life where I could walk away from the business if I needed to, not necessarily indefinitely, but if I wanted to work only a couple hours a week to keep things running, I could do that at this point. And so everything that I do on top of that is because I want to, not because I need to. Like, I don't need to survive. We're at the point where you can thrive. And the question is then, how much do I want to pursue that? Do I want to, take 2 weeks and go up to a national park where there's no cell service and like go for a bunch of hikes? Or do I want to take those 2 weeks and, be in sales calls all the time? And like, maybe that'll add an extra, $2 million to our business in the next 24 months. But like, is that even like, how much interested am I in? That's a big conflict for myself personally at the time. At a very high level, what the kind of goals of Comet Fuel is the way that I say it is to like set a new standard. I really struggle to let good be good enough. Like, I can't just look at like a traditional like onboarding process or a traditional sales process in the space and go, okay, we're going to do that because that's just how you do it. I more so look at that and go, why, like, what brought the industry to the point we're saying this is the process that we should use? What were the learnings? Like, what didn't work before? What doesn't work with this process now? And can we look at that and go, wow, here are all these ways that engagements fail because the onboarding process didn't account for these situations, didn't account for these questions. And when you ask these questions ahead of time, the clients can't even answer them because they just don't realize the importance of that question yet. So how can we basically set a new standard for onboarding and go, hey, here are these clients that unfortunately we lost that we probably could have retained if we had figured out what we learned 6 months into that engagement on day one. What process do we need to figure that out? And then over time, just talking with other agencies and being like, hey, like if this becomes the new standard, the entire industry will look a little bit better. We'll maybe not get, be considered scammers and spammers, every day of the week. And so that's kind of, the way that I look at it is more like we're doing something because this is the best or right way to do it, not just because this is the standard way to do it. The end goal for revenue there, I mean, like honestly, I don't know. It's changed several times. Like we could be happy at 5 million. We might not be happy at 10 million. There are some things that we have in the works that I'm not talking about publicly as of yet that could kind of change a lot of the framing of how we do things, which wouldn't really set a limit to the top line of revenue because there'd be kind of multiple businesses under kind of a parent company at that point. But I don't think that's necessarily a great answer to your question, but it's kind of the best answer that I have right now.
No, I think it's a good answer. I think, it's fair to not have an idea, right? Like, and I think that's a good position for you to be in. You say, I'm making good money. I can really take this any way I want at any time, but also that may give you kind of some like analysis paralysis. So I mean, it's not a bad situation to be in. So no, I appreciate the context. So last question to close us out here. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self?
That's really hard to say because I think that I tend to be like, oh, like even if there was failure, like would I want to correct that failure? Like, did I learn something from that failure that I wouldn't be in this position today if I never went through that? I think that, at the end of every year, I kind of reflect on how the year went. And I think I kind of come to the same conclusion at the end of every year. And I'm not sure if that's just natural or if there's something that I'm doing wrong, but it's kind of like, I wish I took XYZ a little bit more seriously. And I think that really, though, comes from just learning over the course of that year and then being able to reflect on things that weren't done as well as they could have been. So like that first big failure of going from like 20 grand a month to 3 grand a month, that was really like, oh man, I really wish I took this a little bit more seriously and understood this isn't really like a game. This is like an actual business. There are real people on the other side. Like they are expecting something for the money that they give me. It's not just like, oh great, I got on a phone call, someone was willing to pay me money, and that's that was it. But it's just like at the end of the year, I'm like, man, I wish I took this aspect a little bit more serious. I wish we started tracking things a little bit earlier. I guess tracking would be a really good one. Like we've started building out business intelligence dashboards to just get a better grasp of like the leads per channel, close rate per channel, like discovery rate per channel, like show up rate, like all like gross margins per client, all this kind of stuff. And I wish I did a better job of tracking a lot of that like a year or two prior to when I started, because sometimes we're like putting together tracking of like, oh, like now it actually makes sense to track leads per channel, but we don't have that retroactively, and so I can't see what changed 4 versus 5 years ago, but I can see what changed over the past 18 months. And so there's sometimes where it's like, man, I feel like this was doing better 3 years ago, but I don't have the data to say what actually was. I know how it's been doing over the past 18 months, but not over the past 36. So I think tracking is just a big thing for me. So yeah, I would just say tracking probably, so that I could get a better gauge of how things are trending over time and not relying on feeling for too many things.
All right, Jarod. I think that's a good place to call it. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show. I definitely learned a lot. I wish you the best luck in the future. And I will give the floor to you to close out. Any final thoughts? Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. If you're interested in learning more about us, you can go to cometfuel.com, or if you want to connect with me, you can email me directly at jarod@cometfuel.com.
Awesome. Thanks again.